Hi, Lillian Burkart here. We're kicking off the first of these videos, repair videos, with my favorite, the Piccolo. And I want to talk about removing play or relieving binding in a wooden Piccolo. So Piccolo is made of grenadilla wood, can sometimes in that first, particularly in the first year of service, have binding issues, occasionally because the wood shrinks a very small amount. Wood was, after all, a living thing. Wood shrinks and swells as it takes on moisture, and our piccolos are delivered to destinations around the world. An instrument being shipped to a very dry climate, say winters in Minneapolis, will shrink a fractional amount, and so we, the maker, introduce a little play in 3 key areas. That same instrument, if shipped to New Orleans or Japan, would not necessarily see this shrinkage at all. In fact, it could actually see a slight expansion over the roughly 9 inches of the piccolo body length. So let's look at quickly why. The piccolo is, our wooden piccolos are made, again, of African grenadilla with sterling silver, key work, and ribs. The ribs are made of 2 separate pieces, and if over the distance of that piccolo there is even a minuscule amount of shrinkage, we can have binding in 3 places. The 3 places are the G-sharp key, the B-flat key, manifested in binding of the B-flat key, when in fact it's the entire pinned section that is binding, and also the trill section. Now, my sketches here are not at all to scale, but I believe we're going to get the message across in how to work with these on those rare occasions that you may see it. The G-sharp key is the easiest because the key runs independently, and if there is that slight shrinkage, the G-sharp key is simply removed from the instrument and the hinge tubing is faced on either or both ends. When that key is faced, please allow a little bit of side-to-side play in the key to be sure that when your customer leaves, there is not a further seasonal adjustment which could cause them to return to you once again. So again, a very little imperceptible amount of end play, side-to-side play in the G-sharp. The more complex area that we adjust for is the left-hand section, and the play needs to be introduced here between the C-sharp steel and the left-hand steel. So I'd like to jump down to a little larger rendition of this area to talk about the different kinds of play we can see, or binding. I'm going to consider that motion of a section or a key in this direction is side-to-side play, and in this direction is lateral play. We use a conical bearing system, and that bearing should fit perfectly in the right-hand section. Right-hand section is pinned to 1 rib only, and therefore we introduce no play in any direction, end or lateral. When we come to the left-hand section, this is where I see the most common confusion in what's the direction to correct. My orange lines here represent the mech tubing, and the black represents the steel bearing, that is left-hand steel, small C-sharp steel, and its threaded pivot system. When we see the condition that there is no space or there's direct contact of the mech tubing to this post, we will remove the key, this would be the B-flat key in this case, and we face the hinge tubing only. We would remove the pinned key, face the tubing a little. That will allow the entire left-hand section to shift in this direction, which will bring the interior steel closer, the pivot closer as it should be working, and again, we believe will allow that small seasonal maneuverability, wiggle, let's call it. in order to see if in this condition, I've said we have no end play in the key or the pinned key or the section. We do have, in this condition, would have lateral play because you see that the tubing is interfering with the post while the interior steels are not connecting. Therefore, we've got this motion and none of this. Solution: remove the B-flat key, face the tubing of the B-flat key. Alternatively, and more commonly, we can see that there is a very small amount of space between the post and the mech tubing, represented in orange. But if the key is binding, we would in this instance see no lateral play. We would see not only no side-to-side play, but the key would not be working. In this instance, the correct repair will be to, again, the key we're leaving intact because we've got an interference here, steel to steel. So we will, in this instance, remove the key, and we will actually shorten the length of the pivot, relieving the binding issue. Now, we're going to move in a moment to the workbench, where I'm going to show you two techniques that we commonly use with very simple tooling that will successfully get us to solve both of these problems. The third position, so we had G sharp, left hand, and trill section, can be an area with shrinkage that the two posts are caused to come in by a few thousandths of an inch, but that is enough in a closely toleranced instrument to cause a potential binding problem. And we're going to relieve that in most cases by simply adjusting the one or both posts outward. Because this is a conical bearing system, we are able to make that adjustment without significantly altering the function of the bearing system. It is a little bit forgiving. And again, we need play in this section. It needs play when it leaves your workbench if this situation arises in your workshop. So I'm going to ask the camera to come in closely for one last thing on this reference. And here's a drawing of our actual Piccolo C-sharp steel. And I'm going to draw your attention to this small area in between the steel and what will be the threaded pivot. There is a shoulder, we call it the land, directly behind the steel threads, and that is the area we're going to slip. It will actually be a jeweler's saw. We allow 30 thousandths of clearance in our steels, and the recommended jeweler's saw blade will fit in there quite nicely so that we can cut this shoulder back. If we have, returning here to the first condition we looked at, we are going to want to give some relief here to bring this in. So there are two ways to do this. If we see here that we want to bring this steel in further, we have clearance here, we have both lateral play and end play, we would then want to shorten the shoulder of the steel, which effectively allows that to thread in deeper, closing our gap. And our method of repair is to shorten the shoulder. Quickly, these types of repairs can be done on a very high precise, a small Swiss lathe, where the steel could be mounted and a facing tool could draw back the shoulder, or a carefully constructed cross slide could be set up to cut a 42-degree angle and reduce your pivot back by mechanical means. However, that would require collets fitting very precise, not a chuck. There wouldn't be enough stability. Collets to fit this, and some very sharp, accurate tooling. So let's go now to the workbench to look at a couple of the really simple ways this can be corrected. So here we are at my workbench. I'm using a jeweler's saw, a number 4 pillar file, a plastic mallet, and in this case, for moving the post, we use the insert of a ring clamp. To any hard plastic surface with an edge would suffice. Condition number 1, we have Oh, if we can hone in here a little closer, I want to show you, just demonstrate how, what the play is that we're looking for. When I want to check an instrument as it leaves here or as it leaves your workbench, I grab, Piccolo is very small, so I come in with and grab the key arm itself, and I will slowly move this back and forth. You see very small amount of side-to-side play. In the trills likewise. It's almost a you can feel it but can't see it. And the G-sharp key we hold by the key arm and feel that slight side-to-side movement. Now this piccolo is adjusted for delivery, but let's say this in service, this B flat key is binding. I'm going to remove the steel. I first look to see if there's a little bit of space between the tubing. In this case there is, but pretending that the key is binding, we remove it and service the C-sharp steel. So it is binding. I've mounted a similar steel, although we're trying to preserve the 42-degree taper on this pivot. 42 degrees is the standard for all conical bearings in our musical instruments. So rather than file above the key where I have no visibility or opportunity to try to maintain and preserve the 42-degree taper, I'll come underneath with my file. I hold it in this manner so I have full visibility, and by I am lining up my file to be in the same plane as the taper. I start the motor, and I actually watch for the dust on the file to tell me, to guide me, and I will file this back carefully. I would then return it to the instrument, check to see if the key is free. If it's free with just a little excess in play, I'll then wrap a piece of 600 sandpaper tautly around that file so that I can remove, by the same method, remove any score lines that the file may have created. So, opposite condition. We have too much play in this section, which could occasionally happen when an instrument leaves us in the wintertime and goes to a very warm climate. So the wood could potentially grow as it takes on moisture in this area. Mounted again in the bench motor, I'm going to use a jeweler's file. That little land I talked to you about behind the threads is where we will go in with the saw in a perpendicular motion. So I'm going to recommend to you this kerf. This is a jeweler's saw number 0, is only 28 thousandths of an inch wide. It fits very comfortably into that landing. And again, for visibility, I tend to, rather than put the saw blade on the top of the shoulder, I bring it underneath. Now you of course have to be careful which direction your motor is going so that the kerf of your saw blade is actually cutting. And then with motor running, this cuts very quickly, so proceed slowly with 1 or 2 strokes. It's important that this can create a small burr. I'm taking again a number 6, a pretty dead number 6 needle file underneath, and just removing the burr. Then you can go back to your instrument, on and off, to adjust in both of these actions to allow for just that little bit of play, both end and lateral. So that solves our G sharps easy. We are just simply facing the tubing. The trills. If we have a condition that there is a binding trill key, the fastest, simplest, again, this is for minor adjustments only, and that's all you would ever see. I'm going to literally bring the wedge up to between the post and the key, and I will give a little wrap to this, which causes an impact that will slightly move the post out. I suggest doing that on the upper end rather than the lower end because this is more secure with 2 rib screws on either side. I also don't like to do this on the bench because that impact could harm other keys. So I'll either place a cushion underneath or I'll sometimes just do this on my knee, which I'll do right now, holding the instrument a short wrap, and then I would return to check the in play. Now, of course, I've created too much because this was already in adjustment. So in this case, and it's a very good idea to kind of go a little bit too far, because sterling silver on piccolo or flute, any instrument, has a little bit of memory. So if I got this perfectly the first time, then this instrument could go into service and in a week or so spring back a little bit, causing the same problem. So I like to stress relieve, and that is done simply by a very little tap back in the opposite direction. Notice I took the key off to perform this return or stress relief, because if I left my key in place, any impact in this direction would simply be kind of seesawing back and forth. I'd then knock this post, transfer the motion to this post, and I'd have more play than ever. So remove the key when you want to come to the inner direction. It's okay to have the key on as you knock it out. And there we have it. Those are the simple approaches and the correct approaches to addressing the issues should you see binding in those 3 points. And also, this is why in a brand new piccolo, usually arriving to the customer, we expect that little bit of play, and we're asking you to leave it there. It's a healthy thing. This is the end of our first video. Thank you very much.